Welcome to Dad's Ultimate Payback. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from. Your city, your state, or your country. The Silent Dad community is building an army of fathers who refuse to be broken, and I want to know exactly where you are standing with us tonight. Please note that while portions of this story have been shaped with fictionalized elements for creative storytelling and personal reflection, the hard-earned lessons hidden beneath every word are entirely yours to keep. My 35-year-old son, Beckett, held my crisp white envelope between two fingertips, pinching the paper with an exaggerated curl of his lip as though he were handling a piece of biohazardous waste. He held it suspended under the warm glow of the living room chandelier, letting 30 seconds of dead, mocking silence settle over the room before he finally spoke. "Dad, you truly have a God-given talent for ruining every single Christmas," Beckett said. His tone was not raised. It was delivered with that practiced, smooth condescension he had spent years perfecting in corporate boardroom meetings. Sloane's parents gifted us an all-inclusive week at a 5-star private resort in Napa Valley. Her brother bought us a custom 200-bottle dual-zone wine cooler with brass fixtures. And you? You hand us a folded piece of paper, a property tax payment receipt, a cheap, pathetic excuse for a Christmas gift that is nothing but pure trash. My name is Roland Mercer. I'm 60 years old. For 30 long years, I earned every dollar I ever owned by pouring concrete foundations, laying industrial reinforcement rebar, and negotiating commercial property estimates through the brutal, bone-chilling depths of Chicago winters. I have stood on freezing construction sites in sub-zero winds while my knuckles cracked and bled, ensuring that every load-bearing beam was plumb, every footer was set beneath the frost line, and every structure I touched was built to withstand the worst storms nature could throw at it. I paid off this 4-bedroom colonial house in Oak Park, Illinois 11 years ago with the sweat of my own brow. It was the home where I raised Beckett, the home where my late wife, Margaret, planted hydrangeas along the front walkway, and the home sitting inside one of the highest-ranked public school districts in Cook County, a district so coveted that affluent young families paid exorbitant premiums just to get zoned across the boundary line. When Beckett's first venture capital-backed logistics startup collapsed 3 years ago, leaving him drowning in personal debts, I opened my front door without hesitation and handed him the keys, stepping back into the master bedroom while allowing him to parade his family through these halls as if he owned the title outright. What Beckett called a worthless piece of paper was a Cook County Treasurer certified receipt for $6,200, paid in full from my personal savings account 3 days before the deadline. Cook County property taxes are among the most aggressive in the United States. Without that certified draft, the county would have attached a formal tax lien against the property within 14 months, triggering an automated foreclosure process that would have stripped the roof straight from over his head. Furthermore, folded behind that tax receipt was the paid invoice for their family's comprehensive health insurance premium, the very coverage that turned his wife's emergency appendectomy last spring from a ruinous $60,000 out-of-pocket medical bill into a modest $400 copay. I had spent my entire life believing a father does not keep a balance sheet against his children. A real father builds a protective wall between his family and catastrophe, never demanding that they read the ledger back to him. But standing in that living room, I realized my silence had not fostered gratitude. It had bred an arrogant, poisonous sense of entitlement. Across the room, Beckett's wife, Sloane, set her crystal champagne flute down on Margaret's antique oak sideboard with a deliberate clatter. At 32, Sloane possessed the sharp, symmetrical facial structure of a professional social media influencer, a face engineered for high-resolution cameras and sponsored Instagram reels, but possessing all the emotional warmth of a frozen lake. She wore an ivory cashmere sweater set that cost more than my first utility vehicle, her polished diamond studs catching the light as she curled her lips into a thin, icy sneer. "Every year, Roland, you turn our holiday into an embarrassing financial lecture," Sloane chimed in, crossing her legs on our velvet armchair. "We are trying to build an elite network in this neighborhood. Our friends from the country club are flying to St. Bart's and Aspen, and when they ask what Beckett's father gave us for Christmas, what are we supposed to say? That an old concrete laborer gave us a receipt for basic county utilities? It's humiliating." Before I could even draw a breath, my 6-year-old granddaughter, Lily, looked up from the Persian rug near the brick fireplace. She had Margaret's large, luminous hazel eyes, eyes that held light and reflected pure, unconditional honesty. Lily abandoned her pile of torn ribbons, scrambled to her feet, and ran across the hardwood floor, throwing her small arms around my knee and pressing her warm cheek firmly against my rough denim trousers. "I love Grandpa's present," Lily announced to the room with the fierce, absolute moral conviction only an innocent child can muster. "Grandpa always takes care of us." I placed my calloused palm gently on the crown of her head, feeling a profound, painful ache tighten in my chest. An ache born not from weakness, but from an overwhelming love for a child who saw the truth clearly. Beckett let out an irritated hiss through his teeth. "Lily, go upstairs to your playroom right now. Adults are speaking." She looked up into my eyes, searching my face to see if I needed her to stay by my side. I offered her a soft, reassuring nod, and only then did she reluctantly let go of my leg, casting a dark, suspicious glare at her father as she walked toward the hallway stairs. Once the child was out of sight, the atmosphere curdled into something far more vicious. Sloane stood up, smoothing her designer trousers, and walked over to the kitchen counter where I had placed a freshly brewed ceramic pot of loose-leaf spiced herbal tea. The exact family blend Margaret had perfected over 30 years of marriage, a warm aroma that had defined Christmas mornings in this house for decades. Without breaking eye contact with me, Sloane picked up the ceramic teapot, walked over to the stainless steel sink, and tipped it forward. The steaming amber liquid gushed down the drain with a hollow, bubbling hiss. "We are done with these depressing, old-fashioned peasant traditions," Sloane said coldly, tossing Margaret's vintage teapot into the sink where the ceramic handle chipped against the metal basin. She reached into an insulated silver chiller bag, pulled out a $400 bottle of vintage Dom Perignon champagne, and popped the cork with a loud, aggressive crack. "From now on, we drink real vintage in this house, Roland. Try to elevate yourself to our standards for once." Beckett laughed, a harsh barking sound that grated against the walls I had drywalled with my own hands. He stepped into the center of the living room, pointing an arrogant finger around the space. "And while we're on the subject of modernization, Dad," Beckett announced, his voice ringing with cold finality, "Sloane and I have hired an interior architectural firm to remodel this entire main floor starting next month. We're tearing down these traditional moldings, knocking out the dining room partition, and repainting everything in minimalist slate gray." He turned his back on me and walked toward the fireplace mantel, stopping directly in front of the large, gold-framed oil portrait of Margaret, a painting commissioned 20 years ago, capturing her radiant, laughing smile against the autumn trees of our backyard. "This outdated painting has to go," Beckett said casually, as if discussing a broken piece of drywall. "It looks completely rustic and cheap. It ruins the entire modern aesthetic of the room. I want you to take it down tonight and store it in the unheated detached garden shed behind the garage. If clients or investors come over, I don't want them seeing this antique clutter." I stood motionless beside the Christmas tree. The pine needles smelled crisp and sharp, but the air inside my lungs turned to solid ice. To insult my sacrifice was one thing. To throw Margaret's tea down the drain and order her memory banished to a frozen, damp garden shed was the precise moment the load-bearing beam in my paternal heart snapped beyond repair. I looked at Beckett's expensive cashmere sweater, bought with the money he never had to spend on property taxes or health insurance. I looked at Sloane sipping her luxury champagne, standing inside a sanctuary funded entirely by 30 years of my hard labor. They truly believed I was a captive, helpless old man who would endure endless humiliation just to remain near his son. I did not scream. I did not shed a tear. I simply looked at my son and said very quietly, "Understood, Beckett." I turned, walked up the stairs to my bedroom, and closed the door. They believed they had won the room. They had no idea that the silent builder had just inspected their rotten foundation, and the systematic demolition of their entire world was about to begin. The heavy mahogany door of my master bedroom clicked shut behind me, muting the muffled laughter and the clinking of crystal flutes rising from the downstairs living room where Beckett and Sloane continued their holiday celebration. The house was settling in the winter night, the radiator pipes clanking rhythmically behind the baseboards I had installed with my own hands 3 decades ago. I did not turn on the overhead light. I stood in the darkness, looking down at the illuminated street outside my window, where light snow was beginning to blanket the quiet suburban pavement of Oak Park. I crossed to the bedside table, switched on the small brass reading lamp, and reached for the amber prescription bottle sitting next to Margaret's framed photograph. It was my daily cardiovascular medication, a regimen I had followed diligently for over 2 years to manage mild hypertension. 8 months earlier, Beckett had staged what seemed like an act of genuine, loving concern. He had insisted that my longtime family doctor was outdated and had personally driven me to the high-end private clinic of Dr. Quentin Harwood in Chicago's affluent Gold Coast neighborhood. Harwood was an impeccably dressed physician with polished manners, framed credentials covering his walls, and a smooth, reassuring voice that promised comprehensive longevity monitoring for men my age. He had taken my medical history, run a series of specialized baseline panels, and adjusted my daily prescription with supreme professional confidence. I twisted off the childproof cap, tilted the bottle, and shook the evening dose into the palm of my left hand. My hand stopped instantly in midair. For 2 full years, my cardiovascular tablet had been a distinct, deep navy blue with an imprinted pharmaceutical code stamped cleanly across the center. But the small, rounded tablet resting on my palm under the warm halogen bulb was noticeably different, a pale, chalky robin's egg blue, with edges that were slightly uneven, lacking the clean, uniform bevel of my standard medication. A younger man, or someone unaccustomed to the rigorous precision of job site tolerances, might have dismissed it as a minor manufacturing variance, a change in excipient dyes, or a generic substitution by a high-volume retail pharmacy. But 35 years of verifying measurements down to the 16th of an inch had trained my eyes never to ignore an anomaly. I did not swallow the pill. I retrieved a small, airtight zip-top plastic bag from the dresser drawer, the kind Lily used for her apple slices when she spent the weekend with me, placed the pill inside, and zipped it shut. I walked over to the closet, opened the heavy wool winter coat hanging in the dark, and slid the baggie deep into the reinforced interior zipper pocket. 2 mornings later, on December 27th, I drove 40 minutes west through the gray, slush-filled streets of Chicago to an independent, accredited chemical and industrial toxicology laboratory located in an unremarkable commercial district on the west side. I walked into the reception area, signed the intake forms with my real name, paid the expedited testing fee of $750 in crisp cash, and handed the sealed sample across the counter without asking questions or offering explanations. 9 days later, on a bitter Tuesday morning in early January, the certified laboratory report arrived in my secure post office box inside a plain white cardboard envelope with no company logo on the exterior. I sat alone at my kitchen table, the winter sun casting long, pale shadows across the linoleum floor, and read through the 4 pages of technical analytical chemistry 3 full times. The report was stark, unequivocal, and chillingly precise. Gas chromatography and mass spectrometry testing revealed that the active ingredient in the submitted compound was not my prescribed antihypertensive formulation. Instead, the tablet contained a proprietary compound classified as a low-dose, cumulative central nervous system neuroinhibitor, a specialized cognitive suppressant. The certified medical toxicologist summary at the bottom of page 3 outlined the predictable clinical trajectory with terrifying clarity. Administered daily over a 6 to 12-month window, the substance would systematically induce progressive short-term memory lapses, mild cognitive confusion, episodic temporal disorientation, and severe difficulty in executing complex financial or legal judgments. It was designed to fabricate with clinical precision the unmistakable behavioral profile of advancing geriatric dementia. My hands did not shake as I set the papers down. My pulse remained steady. When you discover that a structural beam has rotted through to the core, panic is entirely useless. Only structural intervention can prevent total collapse. Beckett had not transferred my medical care to Dr. Quentin Harwood out of filial love or concern for my health. He had done it as a calculated, predatory strategic maneuver to manufacture a paper trail of mental incompetency. Driven by an icy, methodical focus, I went to my study, opened my laptop, and accessed the shared family cloud storage account. It was an account Beckett had set up 3 years ago when he was launching his logistics firm, granting me administrative viewing access so I could help him review property lease contracts. Beckett, in his supreme arrogance, had forgotten that my access credentials had never been revoked. I searched through the shared root directory until I located a secured, hidden subfolder tucked away beneath corporate tax filings. A folder titled simply and brazenly with a single word, Dad. Inside were dozens of encrypted correspondence logs between Beckett and Dr. Quentin Harwood spanning the previous 8 months. Among the files was a digital audio recording, time-stamped October 14th, a conversation captured on Harwood's private clinical recording system during an after-hours consultation. I clicked play. The high-end speakers on my laptop filled the silent room with Beckett's voice, loose, arrogant, and punctuated by the clinking of ice in a glass. "The old man is tougher than I expected, Quentin," Beckett's recorded voice remarked with a dark, mocking chuckle. "He still manages to review his own bank statements every single Sunday. We need to ramp up the dosage on the next refill cycle. Just give me 6 more months of documented cognitive drift. 6 months where he can't remember his own signature on a commercial title transfer or an escrow release. Once the Cook County Probate Court signs off on the durable power of attorney and conservatorship, that 4-bedroom Oak Park property and his $1.2 million union pension annuity roll straight into my corporate recovery account. That's more than enough liquidity to clear the $500,000 venture debt breathing down my neck and leave a massive bonus for both of us." Harwood's smooth, clinical voice answered, without a shred of hesitation. "The titration schedule is already adjusted for the upcoming 90-day mail order delivery, Beckett. By early summer, the diagnostic baseline will hold up in front of any probate judge in the state of Illinois. Just ensure he takes the blue tablets with his evening meals. I closed the laptop screen slowly. The audio file was conclusive proof of a criminal conspiracy to drug a father into mental ruin, seize his lifelong home, and siphon his retirement funds to bail out a failed, debt-ridden business venture. Yet, even in the face of such monstrous treachery, a final stubborn ember of fatherhood flickered inside my chest. He was my only son. He was the child Margaret had held in her arms when the Chicago winter winds howled outside the hospital window 35 years ago. I wanted to believe, perhaps foolishly, that the crushing pressure of his $500,000 startup debt had temporarily poisoned his mind, that a man backed into a corner might do unthinkable things before realizing the horrific line he had crossed. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and an ink pen. Sitting at the table, I wrote Beckett a 4-page handwritten letter. I did not threaten him. I did not cite the police or mention the laboratory analysis. Instead, I wrote to him as his father. I told him that I knew his logistics company was drowning under severe debt and that the weight of financial failure can distort a man's moral compass. I reminded him that I had spent 30 years solving impossible structural crises and that no debt, no mistake, and no corporate failure was greater than the bond between a father and his son. I wrote that my front door was open, and if he came to me and spoke the absolute, unvarnished truth, we would face the creditors together, liquidate assets transparently, and find a clean, honorable way forward. I placed the 4 pages inside a heavy ivory envelope, wrote his full name across the front, and sent it to his private business office via registered mail with a signature confirmation requirement. I gave him 14 full days to respond. On the 15th morning, the envelope returned to my post office box. It had not been opened. The wax seal across the back flap remained perfectly unbroken, but the edges of the heavy stock paper were creased and violently crumpled, bearing the unmistakable marks of an object snatched from a mail pile, crushed in a furious fist, and thrown into a return basket with total, dismissive disgust. I stood in the freezing January air outside the post office, holding the crumpled envelope in my gloved hands. I looked up at the vast slate-gray Chicago sky as a biting wind swept down Lake Michigan. In that quiet, frozen moment, the last lingering ember of fatherly indulgence extinguished completely. The door of reconciliation had been slammed shut not by me, but by the son who preferred to poison his father rather than confess his own failures. I slid the unopened letter into my inside coat pocket, turned my truck toward downtown Chicago, and dialed the direct private office number of Conrad Winslow. The time for paternal patience was over. The construction of an impenetrable legal fortress was about to begin. The high-speed elevator shot smoothly up the reinforced steel shaft of the Michigan Avenue skyscraper, coming to a gentle, whisper-quiet stop on the 41st floor. When the polished brass doors parted, I stepped into the expansive, hushed reception suite of Winslow, Sterling, and Vance. Floor-to-ceiling glass panels looked out across the frozen expanse of Lake Michigan, where jagged sheets of gray ice drifted across the water under a bitter, unforgiving Chicago sky. I had known Conrad Winslow for 19 years. We first crossed paths during a brutal commercial property litigation involving a multi-million-dollar development project in downtown Cook County. Over 14 grueling months in the circuit court, I had watched Conrad dismantle the opposing counsel's claims with the icy, methodical patience of a master watchmaker taking apart a defective clock, not out of malice, but simply to reveal the structural rottenness hidden underneath. Conrad was a towering man in his late 60s with sharp silver hair, immaculate bespoke tailoring, and cold blue eyes that had seen every species of human greed and betrayal the legal system had to offer. When I entered his private corner office, Conrad stood up from behind his massive mahogany desk, a rare courtesy he extended to almost no one. He shook my hand firmly with a grip as unyielding as cured concrete. He did not waste time with small talk or false pleasantries. He gestured toward the deep leather armchair opposite his desk, took his seat, and leaned forward. "You said over the phone that you needed to build a wall, Roland," Conrad said, his gravelly baritone filling the room. "Tell me what kind." "The kind nobody can climb over," I answered. I reached into my leather briefcase and laid the heavy manila folder flat on his desk. Conrad opened the cover and began to read. For 12 unbroken minutes, the only sound in the high-rise office was the faint hum of the climate control and the crisp, deliberate rustle of turning pages. Conrad examined the certified laboratory toxicology report first, then the chronological prescription logs, and finally the printed transcripts and forensic audio files extracted from the Hidden Dad cloud directory. When he reached the audio transcript where Beckett discussed drugging me to pay off his venture debt, Conrad's eyes hardened into 2 chips of Arctic slate. He closed the folder, folded his hands over the front, and met my gaze. "How fast do you want to move? Immediately," I replied. "I want a 4-pillar legal defense that leaves 0 room for contestation." Conrad pulled a fresh yellow legal pad from his desk drawer, clicked his pen, and nodded once. "Walk me first," I said. "The durable power of attorney. 2 years ago, Beckett brought a comprehensive medical and financial POA to my kitchen table, framing it as a prudent safeguard for aging parents. I signed it because he was my son. I want that document completely revoked across the entire state of Illinois. I want certified revocation notices served to the Cook County Recorder of Deeds, my primary care networks, every major hospital system in the greater Chicago metropolitan area, and all banking institutions holding my commercial accounts. If Beckett ever attempts to make a single medical, legal, or financial decision on my behalf, he is to be legally treated as a total stranger." Conrad's pen moved across the paper in swift, precise strokes. "Done. Certified notices will be dispatched by courier and registered mail before the end of the business day. Second," I continued, "the estate. I want an irrevocable trust established immediately. My union pension annuity, my investment portfolios, and all liquid commercial assets will be transferred directly inside the trust. I will not name a family member as successor trustee. I want a neutral, premier corporate fiduciary named as the sole administering entity. If Beckett tries to petition a probate judge for conservatorship or claim I am an incapacitated adult, he will find nothing in my personal estate to seize. The corporate trustee answers only to the strict terms of the trust agreement. Under Illinois law, an irrevocable trust transfers legal ownership entirely away from your individual name," Conrad noted. "Once funded, you cannot unilaterally dissolve it, and no probate court can attach Beckett's personal creditors to those funds." "That is exactly the point," I said. "Third pillar, Lily. I want an independent, fully funded educational and living trust created exclusively in my granddaughter's name. It will cover every cent of private school tuition, university housing, medical expenses, and living stipends through graduate school. But I want a strict exclusion clause written into the foundational charter. Beckett and Sloan are barred from having any administrative access, signature authority, or guardianship petition rights over those assets. Whatever happens to my son's financial schemes, that 6-year-old girl will never be left destitute because of her parents' reckless greed." Conrad's pen paused. He looked up, his gaze softening with deep, solemn respect. "Understood. The child is completely insulated." "Fourth," I said, leaning in, "we need an ironclad medical evaluation on the public record before they realize what has happened. I want a comprehensive, independent psychiatric and cognitive competency evaluation conducted by the Chief of Geriatric Neuropsychology at the University of Chicago Medical Center. No physicians affiliated with Dr. Quentin Harwood's private network. A battery of clinical tests that will stand up before any appellate judge in this country. I will arrange the evaluation for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, Conrad said. He jotted down the final note, turned the pad toward me, and tapped the paper with the tip of his pen. "Now, what about the house in Oak Park?" I turned my head and looked out the massive windows at the icy waves crashing along the shoreline. "Sell it, privately, off-market, to an institutional cash buyer. But I want a mandatory leaseback clause allowing me to retain full residential possession through the end of January. A commercial asset liquidation company can close the title in 72 hours, Conrad confirmed. Beckett will have no idea the deed has transferred until the transaction is legally recorded. Before we begin the final descent into the snowy mountains of Aspen where the ultimate retribution unfolds, if you stand with a father defending his dignity and protecting what is rightfully his, drop the word justice down in the comments below right now. As Conrad prepared the formal documents, I addressed the final, critical piece of the puzzle, a discovery I had made 2 nights prior. While reviewing our family's shared wireless home security logs, I had discovered that Sloan had repeatedly accessed the digital lockbox in my master bedroom closet. Even more damning, a search of her private tablet's browsing history revealed that she had secretly contacted an upscale vintage jewelry appraisal house on Michigan Avenue, requesting an urgent cash valuation on a rare 5-carat diamond solitaire ring. It was Margaret's engagement ring, a flawless European-cut diamond that had taken me 11 months of back-breaking overtime on construction sites to buy when we were young. Margaret had worn it with pride for 33 years before her passing. Sloan was preparing to steal the ring, liquidate it for cash, and use the proceeds to bankroll her lavish holiday shopping trips and cover her mounting credit card defaults. I refused to let my late wife's legacy be pawned off for designer clothes. The following afternoon, after completing 4 rigorous hours of cognitive and psychiatric testing that certified my mental faculties as functioning in the top 5th percentile for adults of any age, I visited a specialist jeweler Conrad had recommended. I placed Margaret's genuine heirloom diamond in a secured vault deposit box under the bank's custody. In its place inside the original velvet presentation box, the master jeweler set an identical laboratory-crafted moissanite replica, matching the exact carat weight, facet cut, and antique platinum setting. But hidden micro-mechanically inside the hollowed underside of the Platinum mounting was a state-of-the-art military-grade micro-GPS tracking module. The microscopic chip was powered by a kinetic recharge battery and linked directly to an encrypted tracking application on my private secondary cellular phone. I returned to the Oak Park house, placed the velvet box back into the bedroom wall safe, and left the safe door cracked by a fraction of an inch, just enough to tempt a thief who believed she was untouchable. 48 hours later, the private real estate closing was finalized. The irrevocable trusts were fully executed. The certified powers of attorney revocations were stamped by Cook County officials, and my primary bank accounts were officially locked under corporate fiduciary control. I packed a single leather suitcase with my essential tools, my daily medicines in their certified pharmacy bottles, and Margaret's portrait, which I wrapped safely in blankets and sent ahead to a private storage facility. I locked the front door of the Oak Park home for the very last time, feeling the cold Chicago wind against my face, and boarded a flight west toward Colorado. Beckett and Sloan believed they were heading to Aspen to celebrate their unearned luxury and parade their fake status before high society. They had no idea that the foundation beneath their feet had already been completely excavated, and the concrete trap was about to snap shut. The private resort shuttle climbed steadily through the steep, winding mountain passes of Pitkin County, Colorado, where a relentless December blizzard swept heavy white drifts across the towering pines. Aspen Ridge Private Resort materialized through the swirling snow like a monument to modern excess, a sprawling multi-tiered lodge of rough-hewn timber beams, floor-to-soiling glass pavilions, and stone hearths billowing aromatic cedar smoke into the sub-zero air. Beckett had invited me on this lavish mountain retreat not out of a son's filial devotion, but as a calculated public relations prop. He needed to showcase a picture-perfect, multi-generational family portrait to the high-net-worth venture capitalists and private equity investors staying at the resort, hoping to project the illusion of rock-solid stability, while his logistics startup was secretly drowning in $500,000 of toxic debt. Yet, the moment we checked into the grand reception hall, Beckett's curated mask slipped into cold, dismissive contempt. While he and Sloan booked the presidential multi-level chalet, complete with a private heated outdoor pool and dedicated butler service, Beckett instructed the front desk to relegate me to a modest standard single room in the rear auxiliary wing, an isolated unit overlooking the resort's commercial service bays and maintenance dumpsters. "It's on the ground level, so you don't have to navigate the stairs with your fragile joints, Dad," Beckett had remarked casually in the lobby, his tone dripping with fake consideration. "Try to stay in your room until dinner. We have very important venture partners arriving for cocktails, and I don't want you wandering into the private lounges in your work boots." I accepted the keycard without a single word of complaint. I unpacked my modest leather bag, placed my clean clothing into the wardrobe, and opened the digital room safe mounted inside the nightstand. I retrieved the velvet presentation box containing the moissanite replica ring, the identical replacement housing the military-grade micro-GPS tracking module, and set it squarely in the center of the safe, intentionally leaving the electronic safe door ajar by 1/4 of an inch before stepping out to explore the grounds. Within 52 minutes, the encrypted application on my secondary, untraceable mobile phone vibrated silently against my ribs. I pulled the phone from my coat pocket and watched the high-resolution satellite map interface. The glowing blue telemetry dot originating from my safe moved smoothly down the auxiliary corridor, crossed the central courtyard, and settled directly inside the presidential chalet's master dressing suite, specifically pinpointed inside the interior pocket of Sloan's custom fur-trimmed ski parka. She had slipped into my room while I was walking the perimeter, ransacked the unlocked safe, and stolen what she believed to be Margaret's $50,000 vintage diamond solitaire to pay off her mounting luxury debts. The trap was officially armed at 4:30 in the afternoon, while I sat reading beside the massive stone fireplace in the main lodge library. Light footsteps came pattering across the polished timber floor. 6-year-old Lily rounded the corner in her woolen holiday sweater, her hazel eyes lighting up the moment she spotted me. She rushed forward with complete, unhesitating devotion, throwing her small arms around my neck and burying her face against my flannel shirt. "Grandpa," Lily whispered with absolute delight, climbing up onto the leather armchair beside me. She reached deep into her sweater pocket and produced a carefully folded sheet of drawing paper. "I made this for you before Mommy said we had to get dressed up." I unfolded the paper with gentle hands. Sketched in bright crayons was a portrait of 5 figures standing together under a giant yellow sun in front of a lopsided Christmas tree. Standing in the center was a figure drawn noticeably taller than the rest, capped with gray scribbles for hair, with a warm, broad smile. "That's you, Grandpa," she said proudly, pointing a tiny finger at the drawing, "because you keep the roof over our heads." A profound, Quiet warmth moved through my chest. I folded the drawing with reverence, placed it securely in my inside jacket pocket next to Margaret's genuine heirloom diamond, and kissed my granddaughter's forehead. "Thank you, sweetheart. Grandpa will always make sure your future is protected." By 5:05, the grand dining hall of the Aspen Ridge Private Resort was operating at full capacity. The air was thick with the scent of roasted prime rib, aged truffles, and expensive French champagne. Beckett sat at the head of a massive round table reserved for 12, surrounded by 4 prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalists and their wives. Sloane sat beside him, adorned in an ivory silk evening gown, her laugh ringing out with theatrical charm as she entertained the investors with fabricated stories of their family's immense generational wealth. I was seated at the far edge of the table, ignored by everyone except the waitstaff. At precisely 6 o'clock, the head sommelier and the dining room captain approached the table, presenting a silver leather-bound folio containing the evening's comprehensive master bill. Beckett took the folio with the casual, dismissive flair of a man accustomed to parading unlimited wealth. He barely glanced at the astronomical total, over $22,000, which included the party's vintage reserve wine pairings, the private dining surcharge, and an unauthorized $15,000 direct charge Sloane had processed earlier that afternoon at the resort's boutique for an imported chinchilla fur wrap and a private holiday helicopter charter over the Rockies. With a theatrical flick of his wrist, Beckett pulled a heavy, metallic black card from his designer wallet, his premier corporate platinum card linked directly as an authorized user on my commercial line of credit. He dropped it onto the silver tray. "Take care of that, Captain. Put the entire table on my account, plus a 20% gratuity for the staff." The captain bowed respectfully and stepped toward the terminal station. 2 minutes later he returned, his posture stiff and his expression strained with professional embarrassment. He leaned down, speaking in a low, discreet tone. "I do apologize, Mr. Mercer." The terminal returned an immediate refusal. The primary account was locked at the institutional level. The card was declined. Beckett's confident smirk flickered. He let out a dry, forced chuckle, glancing around at the venture partners who had suddenly stopped their conversations. "Nonsense. It's an automated out-of-state fraud alert triggered by high-volume holiday processing. Run my personal backup card." He handed over a second Premier credit card, also issued through my commercial banking relationship. 90 seconds later, the resort's general manager, Dale Pemberton, walked out from the administrative office, flanked by 2 private security officers. He carried the master bill in one hand and an electronic point-of-sale terminal in the other. He stepped directly to the center of the table, his voice carrying clearly across the quieted dining hall. "Mr. Beckett Mercer," Dale announced, his professional composure entirely devoid of warmth. "Both transaction attempts have been categorically declined by the issuing network due to complete revocation of authorized user privileges and total closure of the underlying corporate credit facility. Furthermore, our merchant gateway has flagged the $15,000 boutique charge processed by Mrs. Mercer this afternoon as an unauthorized transaction on an invalid account." The venture capitalists stared in utter disbelief. Sloane's face drained of every ounce of color, turning the gray of wet cement as she dropped her champagne flute, splashing sparkling wine across the white tablecloth. "What is the meaning of this?" Beckett yelled, jumping to his feet, his face turning an ugly, furious purple as the entire restaurant turned to look at him. "Do you know who I am? I run a premier logistics enterprise. This is a technical failure on your banking servers." "This is not a technical failure, sir," Dale responded with icy firmness. "Under Colorado commercial hospitality statutes, unpaid luxury charges exceeding $10,000 constitute felony defrauding of an innkeeper. Unless a valid, verified payment method is rendered within 30 minutes, resort security will immediately impound all luggage within Chalet 3. And we will place a formal call to the Pitkin County Sheriff's Department to initiate a criminal fraud investigation." Beckett stood shaking with humiliation, his eyes darting wildly across the dining room as his investor partners began gathering their coats in disgust. Panicked and desperate, Beckett whipped out his cell phone, punched a speed dial number, and held the phone to his ear, his voice screaming into the receiver, "Dad, what the hell did you do to our bank accounts? Fix this right now. You're having a mental episode and you're ruining everything." I slowly reached into my jacket, pulled out my phone, and tapped the screen to answer, keeping my voice as calm, steady, and immutable as a mountain of granite. "I haven't had an episode, Beckett," I said into the microphone, my words echoing clearly across the hushed dining room. "Look at the man standing right in front of you." Beckett lowered his phone, staring in shock as Dale handed him a certified, 4-page legal folder bearing the embossed golden seal of the University of Chicago Medical Center. "That document," I continued quietly, looking my son dead in the eye across the table, is a certified psychiatric and cognitive competency evaluation conducted 4 days ago by the Chief of Geriatric Neuropsychology. I am officially certified as possessing complete unimpaired legal and financial faculties. The funds you've been living on were moved into an irrevocable trust 72 hours ago. You are no longer spending my sweat, Beckett. You are officially on your own. The storm outside howled against the heavy double-paned glass, piling fresh drifts of snow against the sill of my ground-floor room. It was 11 o'clock at night. I sat quietly in the worn armchair beside the low table, a lukewarm mug of black coffee cupped in my hands, listening to the wind tear through the Colorado pines. I had not turned on the television or unpacked more than my change of clothes. A man who has spent 30 years pouring foundations in freezing weather knows how to wait out a storm, and I knew the first wave was about to hit my door. 3 sharp, hurried knocks broke the silence. I did not flinch. I stood up, walked across the carpet, and opened the door. Standing under the hallway light was Dr. Quentin Harwood. He had thrown a heavy camel hair overcoat over his tailored suit, but the polished, unruffled physician who operated out of Chicago's Gold Coast had begun to fray at the edges. His silk tie was pulled slightly loose, his hairline was damp with sweat despite the mountain cold, and his eyes darted nervously down the empty corridor before settling on my face. "Roland," Harwood said, his voice instantly slipping into that practiced, patronizing warmth he used to placate elderly patients. "I heard there was an unfortunate episode in the dining hall this evening." Beckett is beside himself with worry. As your primary monitoring physician, I felt it was my medical duty to step in immediately. "Come inside, Quentin," I said evenly, stepping aside. Harwood entered quickly, rubbing his hands together to feign clinical concern as I closed the door behind him. He took 2 steps into the center of the room, turning toward me with a grave, furrowed brow. "Roland, look at me carefully," Harwood began, pitching his voice into a low, hypnotic register designed to disorient and gaslight. "The severe paranoia you displayed tonight, cutting off your family's accounts, challenging merchant terminals, presenting random clinical papers, these are classic, escalating symptoms of late-stage vascular dementia with acute delusional episodes. You are experiencing severe cognitive impairment, Roland. If you don't authorize Beckett right now to reestablish your medical conservatorship and let me administer a stabilizing sedative, I will have no choice under Colorado emergency health codes but to have you placed in immediate 72-hour psychiatric holds." I did not answer. I simply walked over to the low coffee table, picked up a heavy dark blue binder, and opened it flat beneath the lamplight. "Take a look at this, Quentin," I said quietly. Harwood scoffed with irritated impatience, glancing down at the first plastic sleeve. Then, the blood drained out of his face with such sudden, violent speed that his skin took on the sickening shade of spoiled milk. Displayed in the binder were 12 full months of certified chain-of-custody laboratory toxicology reports from the independent analytical facility on Chicago's west side. Every single page contained a high-resolution photograph of the pale blue tablets he had prescribed, side by side with gas chromatography readouts identifying the neuroinhibitor compounds designed to systematically destroy my memory. Beneath the lab sheets were certified receipts, pharmacy dispensing batch numbers, and exact chronological logs of every single dose I had saved instead of swallowing. You never took them," Harwood whispered. His hands trembling so violently he dropped his leather medical notepad onto the rug before he could take another breath. The adjoining interior door to the adjacent suite clicked open. Conrad Winslow stepped through the threshold. My 68-year-old attorney was fully dressed in a crisp charcoal 3-piece suit, carrying a thick legal folio stamped with red wax seals. His cold blue eyes locked onto the trembling doctor like a pair of high-voltage lines. "Good evening, Dr. Harwood," Conrad spoke, his gravelly baritone landing with the force of a sledgehammer. "My name is Conrad Winslow, lead counsel for Mr. Roland Mercer. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, a certified digital indictment package, containing this entire 12-month pharmaceutical dossier, along with the audio recordings of your private discussions regarding the fabrication of Mr. Mercer's dementia, was formally submitted to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, the State Medical Disciplinary Board, and the Cook County State's Attorney Special Prosecutions Bureau. Your medical license is being emergency suspended, and a formal criminal investigation for felony endangerment and healthcare fraud is officially underway. I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel before dawn." Harwood's knees buckled. He backed toward the hallway door, his mouth opening and closing in soundless terror. Without uttering another syllable, he grabbed the brass handle, yanked the door open, and fled into the snowy night like a cornered rat. Conrad looked at me, giving a single, solemn nod before retreating to his room to monitor the filings, leaving a single item resting on the table, a slightly crumpled, heavy ivory envelope. The silence returned, But it was short-lived. At precisely 2 o'clock in the morning, the heavy wooden door was violently shoved open from the outside, slamming back against the drywall with a thunderous crack. Beckett and Sloane barged into the room. Beckett's dinner jacket was gone, his dress shirt unbuttoned halfway down his chest, his hair wild and disheveled from hours of frantic failed phone calls to banks and lenders. Behind him, Sloane's face was an ugly mottled red, her mascara smeared across her cheeks, her luxury silk gown rumpled and ruined. "You psychotic, vindictive old bastard," Beckett screamed, lunging toward my armchair, his fists clenched as veins bulged along his neck. "I just spent 4 hours on the phone with the Cook County Recorder's Office. You revoked the power of attorney 11 days ago. You transferred every single cent into an irrevocable trust, and you sold the Oak Park house to an institutional buyer. You sold my house." "It was never your house, Beckett," I replied, sitting motionless, looking up at him without blinking. "It was Margaret's and mine. Built with 30 years of poured concrete and mortgage payment you never contributed a dime toward. You destroyed my life," Beckett roared, spraying spit across the coffee table. "Do you have any idea what you've done? I have people coming for me. I owe $500,000 in venture capital debt that was due at midnight. If I don't produce liquidity by tomorrow, they are liquidating my logistics firm, seizing my personal assets and filing civil fraud charges against me. You had the money. You had $1.2 million in union pension equity that could have saved me." "I know about the $500,000, Beckett," I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a chilled blade. "I know about the venture debts. I know about the predatory loans. And I know about the deal you made with Quentin Harwood to drug your own father into an early grave so you could rob my estate to pay off your bookies." Beckett froze. His breath hitched in his throat, his jaw working helplessly as the realization hit him that every single dark secret he possessed had been laid bare in the light. "He's bluffing, Beckett!" Sloane shrieked from behind him, her voice reaching a frantic, hysterical crescendo. "He's an old, senile fool who thinks he can ruin us. We don't need his pension. We have our own leverage." Driven by sheer unhinged greed and desperation, Sloane reached deep into the interior pocket of her designer coat. With a triumphant, malicious sneer, she pulled out a worn black velvet presentation box, snapping the lid open to reveal the large, glittering European-cut solitaire resting inside. "Look what I found in your pathetic little safe, Roland." Sloane spat, waving the ring in my face with manic delight. "Margaret's 5-carat heirloom diamond. I had it appraised on Michigan Avenue. It's worth over $55,000 on the private market. We're taking this ring to a high-end jeweler in Denver first thing in the morning. We're paying off our resort balance, funding our legal retainer, and we're going to sue you for elder abuse until you don't have a single nickel left to buy your breathing pills." I looked at the stone sparkling beneath the chandelier. The laboratory-crafted moissanite replica caught the light perfectly, its microscopic military-grade GPS tracker pulsing an encrypted telemetry signal directly to the Pitkin County Sheriff's satellite dispatch terminal at that very second. I did not reach for the ring. I slowly shifted my eyes to the table, where the crumpled ivory envelope lay under the lamp. "Before you run to Denver, Beckett," I said softly, "pick up that letter." Beckett looked down at the table, his brow furrowing in confusion. His trembling fingers reached out, picking up the heavy envelope. He saw his own name written in my unmistakable, neat draftsman handwriting. He saw the unbroken wax seal on the back, and he saw the creases where his own hand had violently crumpled it 12 months ago before tossing it back into the return bin. "Open it," I commanded quietly. With shaking thumbs, Beckett tore the envelope open and pulled out the 4 handwritten pages. As his eyes scanned the first paragraph, the arrogance began to peel away from his face like old paint. He read the words I had written to him in the dead of last winter. Words of unconditional love, words telling him that I knew his startup was failing, words offering to stand beside him, liquidate my personal assets legally, and absorb his $500,000 debt together as father and son. If only he had possessed the basic human decency to walk through my front door and speak the truth. By page 3, Beckett's knees gave out completely. He collapsed onto the carpet in front of the table, clutching the 4 pages against his chest as violent, racking sobs tore through his body. "Dad." Beckett wept, his voice reduced to a broken, shredded whisper, the tears falling thick and fast onto the paper. You were going to save me? You offered to pay it all a year ago?" I threw it away without reading it. "Oh God, Dad, what did I do? What did I do?" "You made your choice, Beckett," I said, standing up and towering over him as the wind rattled the glass outside. "You chose to poison the hand that fed you, and now, the storm you built is finally here." The raging mountain blizzard finally broke just as the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies caught the first amber rays of dawn. It was precisely 6:12 a.m. when the heavy glass entrance doors of the Aspen Ridge Private Resort slid open. Letting in a swirl of sub-zero morning air, Deputy Sheriff Kowalski of the Pitkin County Sheriff's Department stepped into the Grand Timber lobby with measured, heavy strides, flanked by two uniformed county deputies and the resort's general manager, Dale Pemberton. Kowalski was a burly, weathered lawman in an insulated Sherpa-lined duty coat, his face etched with 30 years of handling high-altitude mountain disputes. He carried an official county binder in one hand and adjusted his utility belt with the other. I sat in one of the deep leather armchairs near the dying embers of the massive central stone hearth, my packed leather suitcase resting upright beside my boots. Conrad Winslow stood beside me, immaculate in his dark wool overcoat, holding certified court-stamped folios. A moment later, Beckett and Sloan were escorted down the central staircase by private resort security. Beckett looked entirely hollowed out, his expensive suit rumpled and stained from kneeling on my floor, his eyes swollen and bloodshot from hours of sleepless weeping over the 4-page letter he had discarded 12 months ago. Beside him, Sloan clung desperately to her designer coat, still clutching her leather handbag, her posture rigid with defiant panic. "Mr. Beckett Mercer and Mrs. Sloan Vance Mercer," Deputy Kowalski announced, his voice booming across the cathedral ceiling with crisp, unyielding legal authority. "I am serving you with an immediate criminal trespass notice on behalf of the lawful property holder, Mercer Family Irrevocable Trust. The corporate fiduciary managing all underlying asset leases has terminated your guest access effective midnight. You have 15 minutes to vacate the premises, or you will be transported directly to the Pitkin County Detention Facility." "This is absurd," Sloan snapped, her voice climbing to a sharp, hysterical shriek as she backed toward the staircase railing. "My father-in-law is suffering from acute mental dementia. We are taking care of him. We have rights to these bookings." "Ma'am," Kowalski cut in, his cold blue eyes locking onto her handbag, "you have bigger problems than an eviction notice this morning." Kowalski gestured to his deputy, who held up an electronic forensic tracking receiver, displaying an active telemetry frequency and a blinking green crosshair. "At 4 o'clock this morning, this office received an emergency grand larceny report involving a secured personal heirloom equipped with active military-grade GPS microtelemetry. The beacon signal is currently broadcasting from inside your left coat pocket. Step forward and place your hands on the reception counter." Sloan's face lost every shred of color, turning the gray of wet chalk. In a frantic, unhinged impulse, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the black velvet box, throwing it toward the timber floor as if it were burning her skin. "It's not stolen. It was a family gift. He gave it to us." Deputy Kowalski stepped forward, caught the box, and snapped it open, revealing the glittering moissanite stone. "The formal police report, the certified jeweler's serial registration, and the video surveillance from the corridor outside Mr. Roland Mercer's room show you entering an unlocked safe without authorization. That constitutes felony grand larceny and commercial burglary under Colorado revised statutes. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Before the entire resort staff and the lingering venture capital guests, the cold steel handcuffs snapped around Sloan's manicured wrists. She let out a wild, breathless sob of absolute humiliation as the deputies read her Miranda rights, leading her through the revolving doors toward the patrol cruiser waiting in the snow. Moments later, a second county patrol vehicle arrived at the resort entrance. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass, everyone watched as Dr. Quentin Harwood was brought out from the East Wing in handcuffs by state investigators, his face buried in his collar. Stripped of his professional arrogance as an interstate warrant for illegal distribution of controlled neuroinhibitors and fraudulent medical conspiracy was executed on the spot, Beckett stood alone in the center of the vast lobby, shaking violently, staring at the floor as his entire manufactured empire, his marriage, his business credit, his social standing, crumbled into irrecoverable ruins before his eyes. Then, from the hallway near the guest elevators, small footsteps came running across the hardwood floor. 6-year-old Lily emerged in her pink winter coat, clutching her stuffed rabbit by its worn ear. She didn't look at the police officers or her weeping father. Her hazel eyes, the exact shade of Margaret's, found me instantly across the room. She sprinted across the lobby and crashed straight into my knees, throwing her small arms around my neck with all the innocent, pure love a child possesses. I dropped down onto one knee, wrapping my arms around her warm, small frame and holding her tight against my chest. "Are you leaving, Grandpa?" she whispered into my ear, her voice trembling slightly. I pulled back gently, cupped her soft cheeks in my rough, calloused hands, and looked straight into her eyes. "Grandpa has to go build a new house, sweet pea. But listen to me carefully. No matter where I am, you are safe. Grandpa built a wall around you that no storm can ever knock down. Do you hear me?" She nodded solemnly, reached out with her small fingers, and patted my cheek twice, the exact, tender gesture Margaret had done for 33 years whenever I came home from a hard shift on the job site. My throat tightened with profound emotion. I stood up, kissed her forehead, and watched as Conrad gently guided her toward a certified child care advocate who would ensure her safe transfer to family care in Illinois. What Beckett and Sloan did not know, and what their bankruptcy attorneys would soon discover, was the classified, impenetrable shield Conrad had written into Lily's separate, multi-million-dollar educational and living trust. The charter contained a strict, legally binding protective covenant. Beckett and Sloan were permanently barred from using Lily's name, likeness, or voice on any commercial social media platforms, influencer sponsorships, or fundraising campaigns. Furthermore, the trust established that in the event of Beckett or Sloan facing criminal indictment, bankruptcy, or incarceration, an independent, court-appointed corporate guardian would automatically take full legal and financial custody of Lily's educational welfare, completely cutting off both parents from using their daughter as a financial pawn ever again. Her future, her schooling, and her dignity were sealed inside an iron fortress. 6 months later, the freezing winds of Chicago and the snowy blizzards of Aspen felt like another lifetime. I stood on the wide, sun-drenched stone terrace of my modest, single-story coastal home in Naples, Florida. The warm morning sun beamed down across the turquoise waters of the Gulf of Mexico, where gentle rhythmic waves lapped against the powdery white sand just beyond my garden gate. The salt breeze was clean, sweet, and pure, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine and tropical citrus. My physical recovery had been nothing short of extraordinary. Free from the neurosuppressants and the constant, crushing stress of subsidizing an ungrateful family, my mind was sharper than ever. I spent my mornings restoring vintage wooden furniture in my airy garage workshop and my afternoons sitting on the shaded veranda, reading blueprints for a local community center I was helping design as a volunteer consultant. On the teak dining table beside me sat Margaret's genuine heirloom diamond ring, returned safely to its velvet box, reflecting the radiant Florida sunlight like a beacon of enduring love. Beside it was Lily's crayon drawing of the 5 figures under the giant yellow sun, neatly preserved inside a custom walnut frame. Beckett's logistics company had officially collapsed into Chapter 7 liquidation, his assets seized to satisfy his creditors, while Sloan remained tangled in criminal proceedings in Pitkin County. They had learned the hard way that when you systematically destroy the person who laid your foundation, you inevitably end up buried in the rubble. I took a slow, deep breath of the warm coastal air, feeling the peace of a man who had fought his battles with honor, defended what was sacred, and walked away with his soul intact. That is the true essence of family justice. Family justice is not born from reckless hatred, spiteful shouting, or petty vengeance. It is born from boundless patience pushed past its absolute limit. It is the moment a good man stops carrying the weight of people who only value him as an ATM, stands up on his own 2 feet, and lets the law and natural consequence do the heavy lifting. Never mistake a father's silence for weakness, and never forget, when you live with integrity, no storm on earth can ever tear down the foundation of your self-worth. Thank you for staying with us until the very end on Dad's Ultimate Payback. If Roland's story reminded you of the power of quiet strength, self-respect, and true justice, please take a second to hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and share this story with a friend, a father, or someone who needs to hear it today. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice and your support keep this community standing strong. Until next time, protect your peace, stand your ground, and take care of those who truly love you.